Emergency, thank you, and Sustainability Policy and Development Scrutiny Panel. It's lovely to see you. This is the first of a new 4-year term, so forgive us if we're a little bit out of touch with procedures and policies and things aren't quite as they should be, but I'm sure we'll improve as we go along. So, as this is the first meeting, I would like everybody in the room to introduce themselves for our many watchers and listeners across the globe. I'm Andy Waite, I'm the chair of the panel, I represent Keynsham East, and should we do the officers first?
Hello, I'm Michaela Gay, Democratic Services Officer.
Morning, Kerry Williams, Policy, Development and Scrutiny Officer.
Hello, I'm Ollie Henman. I'm a councillor for Walcott, and I'm also Cabinet Project Lead for the Climate Emergency.
Louise Morris, I'm Head of Green Transformation at Baines Council.
Jane Whiteman, Service Delivery and Compliance Officer for Parking Services.
Hello, I'm Andy Dunn, I'm the Team Manager for Parking Services.
Hello, I'm Chris Major, Director of Place Management.
Hello, June Player, Councillor for Westmoreland Ward.
Hi, Jess David, Councillor for Moorlands Ward.
Hi, Ian Halsall, Councillor for Oldfield Park Ward. I'm here to substitute Councillor Orton.
Hello, I'm John Leach, Councillor for Walcott.
Hello, Saskia Helges, Councillor for Lambridge Ward.
Hello, I'm Alex Beaumont, I'm Councillor for Keynsham North Ward.
Well, that's very impressive. We don't have to do it again now. It's lovely to see this officer here that I don't think I've ever seen in the flesh before, even though I've seen you many times on a little screen. So it's really good. Okay, so we'll move on to the emergency evacuation procedure.
When the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. The designated exits are signposted. Arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people.
Okay, and we now move on to apologies for absence and substitutions.
I've had apologies from Councillor Michael Orton, who has been substituted by Councillor Ian Halsall, and we've had apologies from Councillor Anna Box. Okay, this part of the agenda always goes fast. You get into this false sense of security that are going to be owned by about 10:30. So we then move on to declarations of interest. Does any councillor have a non-disposable pecuniary interest or any other interest in any of the items on the agenda? Okay, that's very clear. Item 5, to announce any urgent business agreed by the Chair. I have no urgent business at this time. And item 6, items from the public or councillors to receive statements, petitions or questions relating to the business of this meeting. Again, I'm sure it's because it's the first meeting of the cycle. We have none at this time, and I think we should relish that because it's not always the case. We then move on to item 7, which is the minutes of the last meeting. Rather embarrassingly, we don't have a single person in the room who was actually at the last meeting, unless any of the officers were. And we have had a notice from the previous chair, Karen Walker, to say that she is quite happy with the minutes. So we need to approve the minutes, despite the fact nobody was here to listen to the meeting. So do I have somebody who would like to... thank you. I'd like to propose accepting the minutes, and a seconder, please. Okay, thank you. That's Alex and Jess. I'll probably call you by your first names if that's all right, rather than councillor whatever. So, those in favour of accepting the minutes we weren't at? Wonderful. Thank you. That's unanimous. And that brings us to the first substantive item of the meeting, which is the climate strategy overview. We have with us Councillor Henman, who's going to introduce it, and also Jackie Taylor and Louise Morris, who are going to be supporting in the situation. Okay, so just a sentence from me. I mean, this is an ongoing piece of work. Nobody's suggesting it's perfect.
And there's lots that we can learn and lots we want to learn together as a group to move forward, to consider policy as well as scrutiny as we go on our way to 2030. Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, first of all, it's really a pleasure to be here, and it's a great privilege to be able to speak to you today. I've been working closely already with Sarah Warren, the Deputy Leader who takes the overall lead on the climate and ecological emergency, and I'm very, very pleased that we have a very ambitious agenda to share. I was actually in Paris in 2015 when the agreement was struck, and we're now halfway from 2015 to 2030. So this is really a crucial time for many of us and for all of us as a community to really step up and push forward on the agenda that's been set out. And I think it's also worth noting, Chair, that the recent elections, where our party did so well, demonstrate there is a clear demand from the public around action on climate and the ecological emergency. So, as you say, there's already been work done, and let's work together to take that further. So today, Louise has kindly run through a number of the key areas that were already achieved over the recent years, which I can't claim credit for, but I think have already demonstrated the direction of travel. And of course, we want to work with you to plan ahead for the coming 4 years. So if I just run you through, we're going to give you a brief overview of both the climate and the nature package, which was adopted recently in March. Within that, you'll see the overall strategy and then the action plans that flow from that, and what the key priority areas are that have been delivered so far. Then, looking ahead, what are some of the key areas of challenge that we'd like support and interest from the panel? So, I'm sure these are very familiar to all of you, so I don't think I need to go over them, but you know that Baines was one of the first to adopt a climate emergency strategy back in 2019, and that's been updated recently as well. That sets out the overall direction of travel, and then more recently the ecological emergency action plan, which gives more specifics on the ecological side, the nature side, which is also crucial when you look at the overall picture of sustainability. So some of the key areas that have already been delivered. So there are 4 priority sort of top-line areas that would help to deliver on the overall ambition to reduce our carbon emissions, to contribute to reducing climate change overall. So first of all, decarbonising buildings. As you probably are aware, this council had the first net zero new build planning policy in the local plan partial update. And that's something I know that planning colleagues are looking at. How does that then get applied? What's some of the guidance that needs to be updated to ensure that we really are moving forward on net zero with new buildings? Targeting residential retrofits. Just this week, I think, there's going to be the retrofit accelerator announced publicly, and that again brings new money in to allow the developers and others who are interested in making sure that we deliver on retrofits, that they have the right information, they get that information out to the public so people know how to go about retrofitting in our area. Secondly, decarbonising transport. So the top line there is to try to bring down car use within the city, 25% reduction. That obviously is very ambitious. A big part of that is to do with encouraging active travel, moving towards better cycling infrastructure, as we know, encouraging, ensuring that we have bus use as active as possible, looking at other opportunities. Of course, there's the e-scooter approach that's been tested, and there's a new contract coming on that as well as EV charging points. So 95 of those have been installed so far, and more will be coming. Thirdly, renewable energy, and obviously this is a big area, and I think this is something that we'd love to explore more over the coming months. The target overall, an ambitious target, is to get to 300 megawatt capacity across the district by 2030 in renewables. Some of that is supported, as we've said, through the local plan partial update, and a big part of that needs to be encouraging more solar, domestic solar. There's been the Solar Together plan so far, and there's a new round of Solar Together coming. That ties back to also the planning questions to ensure that, where possible, it's made easier for people to be able to take those options for renewables, even on heritage buildings and so on. We were also just discussing before, could there be ways of, for example, generating hydropower from the Avon? Are there other opportunities out there that we haven't explored yet that could be explored in the future? And then finally, the council's own emissions on the council estate and the buildings. Retrofit programme is underway on the council estates buildings. 30 EVs, electric vehicles, already in the council's own fleet, and a 12 megawatt target for renewables on the buildings that the council owns directly. So now on the nature side, just to give a bit more detail on the Ecological Emergency Action Plan. So, firstly, increasing the extent of land and waterways managed positively, so that's looking at biodiversity, encouraging more biodiversity, maximising opportunities on council land itself, more trees on council land, nature-based solutions, but also it's not just about our own land, it's about how do we work with landowners, how do we work in collaboration with others across the district to encourage them to also look at other ways of managing their land. I know this is something that Councillor Jess has been already looking at, and where do we then find collaborations? What does that look like in terms of relationships with the AONB that surrounds the city and other key stakeholders? Secondly, increasing the abundance of key species, so that really is the biodiversity and wildlife side. More support towards wildlife in the infrastructure projects, reducing the use of pesticides, pollinator projects, and working with local communities across the whole area, including the Chew Valley and other key areas where we can really encourage and increase biodiversity. And then finally, engaging people, and I think this is also something that hopefully we can explore more in the coming months. How do we get better at bringing in the community to work with us, work in collaboration, neighbourhood nature areas, green social prescribing, so that's looking at how the impact on people's mental health of being in nature, and that, again, can be a key part of Bath as a destination, as a sort of wellness kind of hub, if you like. And then does that generate new jobs, new opportunities? So seeing nature as an opportunity for economic recovery as well. So a few top-line performance indicators. I know this is also something that we'd like to explore more in the future, but how do we measure what's already been happening? So these are a few of the initial performance indicators that have been developed. One, in terms of the overall emissions. So those emissions are coming down. The arrow points up, but it's actually a decrease. So that's a little... but I suppose it's showing that it's an improvement. And so you can see that the emissions have come down quite significantly, 40%. And then the council's own emissions as well, coming down by 68%, which is a good sign. There's obviously more to do, but things are moving in the right direction. And the renewable energy capacity is already moving in the right direction. But of course, there's a lot more to find in that one. So, finally, a few of the challenges that we're facing and that we'd love to explore and follow up with this group over the coming months. I've already mentioned the retrofit. How do we scale up work on retrofitting not just our own buildings but across the whole area? The renewable energy, both in terms of generating renewable energy but also the grid connections. We know that the national grid unfortunately doesn't have the capacity at the moment to actually scale up in the way that we'd like to. So what can we do also collectively to lobby national government to improve the grid connections to allow for that infrastructure to develop? The sustainable food, local food, I know this is something that, a number of councillors have already raised. How do we improve the work with allotments? How do we look at regenerative agriculture in the surrounding area? Climate adaptation. Again, we know this is an area of interest. Councillor John Leach is particularly keen to explore, what is the council doing in terms of recognising that change is already happening, and how do we adapt our environment, how do we adapt to that changing environment. And then building public support for change. This is really about community engagement. Where do we go next in terms of public meetings? We have an opportunity. I understand that Kate Rayworth, the author of The Donut Economics, is coming to Bath in October. How do we use that moment? How do we go further with additional meetings over the coming months? And then finally, the measuring piece. How do we get even more different ways of measuring. What are the key performance indicators that you'd like to see us developing? I've already been discussing, can we include, for example, the air pollution figures as part of that? How do we link across the data that we might be able to find from across all the different council areas? So I think that is it from us, but of course we're very happy to take questions and discuss further.
Thank you. Mercifully brief, well done. Okay, so we're at 10:15. I think we've got 45 minutes to talk about this, which I think is a decent chunk of time. So what I'm going to suggest is, if you ask one question and then move on, and then hopefully you'll get it through it, then ask two or three at one time, because it only confuses me, basically, as well as everybody else. So who would like to be first? Okay, Saskia?
Thank you, Ollie. That was very useful. I've got a question about decarbonising transport. So you said that the 25% reduction in car miles is quite ambitious, which I agree with. But WECA has set a target for 40% reduction. They said this in March 2023, so I'm not sure when the last update was done. But yeah, my question is Baines looking at adapting that target, so updating our strategy, and that's obviously way more ambitious. So yeah, that was my question.
Well, that's obviously a key question. I think the main thing is to look at how do we actually deliver on the change that we want so far. So I think the 25% is already a good start. I guess the question now is how do we actually make sure that we are following up when it comes to cycle routes? How do we follow up in terms of the shift? We've got the Livable Neighbourhoods plan, which is coming through in the coming months. We've got the new residence parking zones, looking at the impact of those over the coming months. And yes, if we can be more ambitious, then I think we'd certainly look at how we can take that further. But I think we first need to get to that 25% and then hopefully go beyond that. Yeah.
I think this is a topic where discussing in more detail another time.
Yeah, we could have, if there's an interest, we could have a whole session specifically on transport, because I think that is such a big issue.
Yeah, that's something I also probably said at the beginning. We are looking to populate our further meetings going forward, so if you have a particular interest in a particular aspect of our climate emergency, then we can certainly put it on the work plan. So would you like that, Saskia, to be on a meeting in the near future?
Well, what would it be specifically about? It's a big one, though. Anything more? I guess we could talk about how we measure progress in terms of reduction and considering changing the target. Although I guess you've just said that you may not. I guess you're not sure if you would consider that by 2030. Is that what you're saying? Or could you clarify, please?
Well, so the 25% I think was within the next 4 years. So then it depends if you're saying 40% by 2030, from what baseline, I guess. This is where I think we need to explore a bit more. But having a longer discussion on, what are the baselines, what are the different interventions that are coming up that could improve that, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, we have already a policy of journey to net zero by 2030. So we could ask, for example, at the next meeting, to sit an update on where we are with that, which would include transport and all the other aspects as well, just to see where we are. Would that be agreeable as an activity?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Jess?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And firstly, I just wanted to make a comment that it's really nice to see the progress updates for the climate and ecological emergency together, because I think previously we've had different updates at different times, so it's really good to see the more holistic overview of all the work. The question that I had was really about the level of our operational staff in the council to support our work on the ecological emergency. So I'm thinking particularly about the people we have in our parks team, but also our neighbourhood cleansing team as well, to support stuff like community food growing, neighbourhood nature areas and ecological improvements in our parks. So, for example, if a community wants to get together to have some improve wildflowers in a local park, there's a certain amount of work to prepare the ground. They need some support from the parks team. And I think my experience at the moment is that with all the cuts we've had over the years, there just isn't that support there. So, more positively, I guess, what are the opportunities to get some more operational support through capital projects? Are there any? And how else can we work with partners to really support community groups who want to kind of do more in response to the ecological emergency and work with the council and improve local areas? Do you have any ideas on that? Or if, yeah, I'll leave it there for a moment.
So colleagues across the council, I think, do a very good job at bringing in money from various sources. So be it Heritage Lottery Fund, or be it directly from central government, or be it from the Combined Authority, for example. So we all know that budgets are constrained and it's a challenge, and I do genuinely feel that colleagues do a great job at bringing money in for bespoke projects. I think a key thing that has happened within our organisation is a cultural shift towards transformation when it comes to climate and nature. So the council doesn't take an approach which is there's a small team and they will do climate and nature. The approach is one where we all need to consider climate and nature, and that cultural change does take time, and obviously we're on a journey, and myself and my job share, Jackie Clayton, we lead a green transformation team where we're embedding that, and obviously part of the Liberal Democrat manifesto is also about embedding climate and nature decisions across the entire authority. So that commitment is there at the very centre of our organisation. So I suppose if you're asking about the cultural change, it's there. If you're asking about people's endeavours to bring in external funding, we try very hard. And I think probably the third part of your question was about communities and working with them. And again, I think that's something which we all need to consider, how we do that, and arguably how do we do it better together.
Can I ask a substantive question? I mean, we essentially started with hardly any staff, I think I'm right in saying, in 2019 or thereabouts. So how has it improved? How has the team grown in the last 4 years?
So I've been here for a year, so I don't have experience of what happened prior to that. But the organisation has established a Green Transformation Service, and we've been in existence for a year. So I'm a head of service, and Jackie and myself are the first heads of the Green Transformation Service. And our remit is to embed, basically, and ensure that that culture change happens. So we have, I'm not going to be able to give you the exact number off the top of my head, but probably 2/3 of our service are funded from external capital pots of money. So it's not a pull on revenue funding for the council. That's mainly on the ecology side, and that's all about partnership working, working with water companies, working with National Trust, working with local community groups. And then on the climate side, we are a growing team. We're quite small. I'd say we're a boutique at the moment, probably 5 full-time equivalents and growing slightly. But the key thing is there's commitment up the chain, directors, chief exec, full support of the service.
With the external funding, I assume it's fixed over a period. So is it likely that the funding will continue certainly for the next 4 years?
So obviously I don't have a crystal ball on what will happen when current projects come to an end, but the 5 projects that I'm thinking of on to do with nature, they are all for 3 or 4 years, and the nature of accessing funding means obviously they don't all start at the same time, because it depends on who and how and where you're accessing the money from. So they're sort of running in parallel. Some of them will finish in 2 years' time, others in 5 years' time. But I think the issue of nature and the projects that we're doing, I think that definitely warrants a more substantive conversation about where they are, who they're with, and what the benefits are for places, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for the report. So I didn't say that earlier on. It's very good. Jess?
Just as a follow-up, could I ask you, Andy, via the chair, basically, looking, when we next get the chance to look at the budget papers, for the next financial year, it might be useful for us to have an understanding of staff levels to support work on the ecological emergency and climate, actually. And it's been really good to see the establishment of the transformation, the green transformation team, and all the steps forward we've taken. But I think we should, as a committee, try and keep an eye on the operational staff levels that we have and just make sure that we don't see further attrition in future years. So if we could ask Councillor Henman for some data, I think, on the staff that we currently have, both on the policy side and the operational side, to support our work on the climate emergency. That might be quite useful.
Yeah, if that could be in the update for the next meeting. We normally get a report from the Cabinet member, so that would be helpful. And obviously, as we get into the budget, which is in the autumn, sort of December time, I mean, it would be very helpful to know if we were increasing our commitment to this area and hopefully not decreasing it. Yeah, good point. Yeah, happy to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if I might respond very briefly, I think, yeah, absolutely, it's a really good point, and we can certainly look at that. We can get the details. I mean, one thing I would say, even just from the few meetings that I've had so far, it's a very dynamic team, a very effective team, and as you say, recruiting new people at the moment. So I think there's a real opportunity to build on the success, and hopefully, as you say, bring in even more talent to actually deliver on this agenda.
Saskia?
So, Chair, quite a lot of the measures that are currently within the climate and ecological strategy are about, well, they affect our public spaces and our streets and our pavements. And my question to the Council is there a plan to adopt a curbside strategy? This has been used in other councils where it's a strategy which would cover things like EV charging, but also tree planting, and it would also affect things like the new micromobility tender that is coming in, the new provider, so parking of e-scooters, parking of shared e-bikes, all those issues that are they're all to do with several of these items that we've discussed today, and they would help us move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful point, and it's certainly been raised also by Walk Cycle Bath. I know that they've been looking at exactly that. What does the curbside strategy look like? How does that compare, as you say, with other similar authorities? Makes sense that we should incorporate that as part of the forward planning, and linking that to the wider transport discussions, as you say, around cycling, around the new contract that's coming in, where there'll be not just the e-scooters but e-cargo bikes available, how they manage so that they don't end up in a canal or something, so ensuring that there is that joined up approach at the curbside, I think is a really good point.
Okay. Any further questions? Yes?
Right, I'll ask one last one. Is there any work going on around supporting local food growing, particularly in terms of sustainable methods of growing, and how can the council play a role in that?
So, I'll be completely honest, I can't give you a definitive answer on what we're doing on food growing right now. So I'm very aware that it's a manifesto commitment, and I know that the team is looking into it. So maybe that could be something we could come back to the panel with, if that's acceptable.
Yeah, that could also be like a work plan.
Stick down the work plan?
Yeah,
local food growing. That's
it's definitely down as one of the challenges that we need to consider. Yeah.
Can I just ask a question back to the panel, if I may? Just on that question about how we engage the community better, I don't know if there are other thoughts that anyone has, and whether that could also be a subject for a future meeting. How do we build on, wider sort of different forums, different dialogues with the community?
Yeah, I mean, there are forums across North East Somerset and Northern Bath. In fact, there's one in Cambridge tonight. And that would be a good way of doing it, because there's quite a lot going on in the parishes and town councils in North East Somerset, which we need to be aware of, because sometimes the communication between Baines and the town and parish councils is not brilliant. And I'm not having a crack at anybody, it's just life, we all go on and it's busy. So some sort of aspect in those forum meetings would help. In Bath, I'll bow to the Bath councillors for that one. from the Bath councillors? I don't know.
Well, there's the Bath Area Forum, obviously, but I wanted to mention schools. So engagement with young people is really important, and there are certain structures already in place, but I think going out to both primary and secondary schools would be very good.
Yeah, I mean, schools are very active already, aren't they? And they should be, because obviously if we're going to continue with this process, we need to convince, is that right? Yeah, that probably is the right word, to convince them that it's actually relevant and important to do that. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, I support that as well around schools. So it'd be nice to see the council kind of, I guess, convening topic-based meetings, so one around school transport, for example, to bring together the different parent groups that are involved in, walk or cycle to school type initiatives, and hear what the blockers are, or what the questions are, or how the council can help. And also, to go back to food, I think we've been in touch directly about, would it be possible for the council to kind of bring some of these local grower networks together to help them, I'm going to get my language confused, cross-pollinate, but to help them network and talk to each other, but also understand what the council can and can't do. Obviously the council has limited resources, but just by bringing people together, I think we could help to build momentum.
A successful conference last year with young people, and they certainly, my impression was they don't need convincing. I think they want to convince us that we need to do more. I think there's also something to consider about anxiety in young people. So climate and nature declarations and emergencies are one of the main causes of anxiety. So there's something about mental health in young people that we just need to be very cognizant of as well.
Maybe just to add, I think also, it would be great, as you say, to build on that experience with working with young people, and maybe also connecting that with, for example, the climate hub that's being established. Where is some of the expertise already in the community? How do we, as you say, Jess, how do we connect the existing knowledge and allow for cross-pollination between those different groups that might have some of the solutions already out there?
Okay, John?
There is a Bath Allotments Association, and I'm in contact with them because several of their members, of their more active members, are residents within my ward. And engagement is good, but I think we might find that the pressure is coming from the associations that we might engage with for us to do more. And to pick up on your point there earlier, we're going to find we're being pushed to do more, provide more resources, and to provide more manpower to facilitate the things the community wants us to do, rather than us in some way taking it to the community.
Yes, good point. Alex, and then June.
Thank you. I work at one of the schools in Bath, and I remember they had a conference. It was either Widcombe or Haysfield. There was a big climate thing. I think it was across Baines they were doing, and I was wondering if we're planning on having one in North East Somerset anywhere. I don't know whether it's just a Bath thing, what was happening. I was just wondering if I could have more details on that.
Well, absolutely. I think as Andy, as the chair, has already said, I think it's absolutely crucial that whatever we do is not only within Bath, but is across North East Somerset. You're absolutely right. And we were discussing, weren't we, the possibility of having a number of different meetings, so community meetings both in Bath, in North East Somerset, for example, in Keynsham, in the Chew Valley, in different parts of the area of the authority. Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm very keen about the community aspect of it all, because these other ways of dealing with it are so immense. The majority, us little people in the community, we can't really get involved in that other than maybe hear presentations like this. And a lot of people do want to be involved in their own little way to contribute so they feel a part of it. And as we all know, if everybody did a little something, the cumulative impact throughout the world would be immense. Is there maybe a way of bringing a road show to the wards? Because then they've got somewhere to focus in on. A lot of people, certainly I feel in my ward of Westmoreland, They don't go to forums. They're not in community setups. But at least if we got told there's a roadshow coming to Westmoreland and maybe at the Oldfield Park Baptist Church or somewhere like that, we can then inform our residents. And because in a way we've informed them and they know us to a point, I think that will be much more motivating for them to come along. And it's got to be suggestions that they can do and which is not going to impact on their pockets very much.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with you, June. And in my day job, I help to run a charity which supports local action on sustainability. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the way that we're going to change things. And I think, again, coming back to that suggestion of having a roadshow, having different ways of engaging in each ward, I think would be absolutely brilliant. And I know we are looking at how we build a whole engagement strategy over the coming year, and we'd love to explore that more with this group. So it's not limited, as you say, to the more formal forums, but it goes out genuinely to community centres, to local areas where people already meet. And so, as you say, they feel more comfortable, they're more likely to open up and talk about their own concerns. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, farmers' markets would be a good spot for that, because we in Cambridge Town Council, we often have stalls at those markets as a way of getting our message across. And there are, I don't know how many there are in North East Somerset, but there's quite a few farmers' markets around. And you're tapping into the right people, probably, because the people that are likely to attend a farmers' market are probably the ones that are interested in sustainability and growth and that sort of thing. Any further questions? Okay. The presentation, and we're ahead of time. So, Andy, you may have a longer session than you expected. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so that's me a bit by surprise. So Andy is going to talk to us about a fairly substantive document that he has prepared, and this is more policy in a sense, because we're still at consultation, which I believe is happening very soon, and this is a new departure for us to try and, I suppose, and I'm not trying to steal your words, but the polluter pays, effectively, is what seems to be the plan. So over to you, Andy.
Move along. Thank you, Chair. So these are proposals that have been developed in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Transport and the Cabinet and other senior officers itself. So initially, looking at paid-for parking, this is focusing on Bath. So as a council, we process about 2.2 million paid-for parking transactions across our area annually. And about 28% of these, which equates to about £1 million worth of income, comes in through cash. The rest of those come in through my permit, and that equates to about £8 million of our total income. Our current pay and display machines are about 10 years old, as a minimum, and they're no longer produced by the suppliers. They provide no real-time parking data to help inform strategy development, and they need additional investment due to the rolled and proposed switch-off of 3G communications across the nation. They're also not able to support the proposed emissions-based charges. So we also know that mobile phone ownership decreases with age, and this makes phone payments more challenging for this age group. So choice remains important for both income, but also as a payment channel as well. And our new equipment will maintain cash options. It will also require customers to provide their vehicle registration mark into the machine, as they currently do with My Permit anyway. This will help to facilitate emissions-based charging. It also prevents the transfer of pay and display tickets purchased in cash from one customer to another, a practice that we know is common throughout the area. So it would also be the first council that we're aware of to propose emissions-based charges through our accessible machines. We know some local authorities across the country, through media reports and direct engagement, have introduced this, but with cashless only. Next slide, please. Cool. So, a bit about the local context to emissions-based variable charging. In 2022, we introduced emissions-based variable charges for on-street parking permits, and this was after extensive engagement the previous year. These proposals for Bath car parks build on the same process. It uses the same rationale and the same themes. The focus of the proposals is about pedestrian safety, and that's important for consistency throughout the development. They're designed to reduce air pollution to protect the most vulnerable. They're also designed to incentivise the displacement of more polluting vehicles from our city centre to more sustainable alternatives, such as the park and ride sites. And in these cases, the prices will remain unchanged. This will also help to reduce congestion on the network. Of course, any reduction in emissions from the tailpipe of a vehicle will also have a beneficial impact on the climate emergency as well. But that's not the core reason for these proposals. This is not about raising revenue, and that's also an equally important point. Our analysis shows that about 34% of current customers, those with the least polluting vehicles, which includes EV, they'll experience no change as a consequence. Only those with more polluting vehicles will pay more, or they'll be encouraged to use our more sustainable alternatives. So, the operation of the charges itself in the car parks. So the customer provides their vehicle registration mark via their preferred payment channel, this My Permit or through the machine. The system then calculates the charge that they're required to pay, and this allows them to then seamlessly make the required payment. Our officers will get almost real-time data on these transactions on their handheld devices. That means that customers no longer need to return to their machine to display the ticket. They can still do so if they wish, but the other benefits to that are no more penalty charge notices for customers because the ticket's fallen into the footwell, or they've accidentally placed it upside down, or the wind has blown it. We'll be using DVLA data to calculate these charges. This does mean that unregistered vehicles will be liable for the highest charges. This helps to encourage DVLA registration, which is a legal requirement, or it incentivises the use of sustainable alternatives. Of course, in the event of a technical issue with the equipment itself, customers will only be liable for the lowest price. We recognise that these are complex charges, and it therefore requires clear signage to help manage that customer journey. Whilst other local authorities are introducing these charges, as I've already said a moment ago, they're doing so only via their mobile platforms, with no cash or card options. So we have a phased approach to machine installation. We'll first be installing machines in Bath by the end of this summer. We'll follow with on-street locations and other locations throughout the area later in the year. Our traffic regulation order public consultation is now scheduled to begin on the 13th of July, and that's in order to meet the September launch date that's been dictated by the budget. This will provide an additional opportunity to review feedback and review our equalities impact assessment. And we're also seeking feedback on our proposals for car park signage to help with that customer journey. Engagement with customers is a key priority throughout this process. And we're taking a proactive approach to raising awareness, and this includes direct customer contact with all those customers making those 2.5 million transactions, using media and additional signage in our car park. Success will look like the displacement of these more polluting vehicles away from the city centre. It will be the improvements in the air quality and public safety that result. It will also lead to increased officer time away from the car parks on our residential streets where people want to see them. And next slide, please. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Any questions? John?
Thank you. You say that the driver is road safety more than climate change. I missed the bit about how this plays into road safety as opposed to, say, public health.
Thank you. No, that's a good question. The emphasis is around pedestrian safety. So by reducing air pollution, reducing emissions from vehicles, we improve the safety of especially on vulnerable people that are more affected, those with lung conditions, those with heart conditions. And that's a key point that came through from our on-street charges, driven in part because of the regulatory framework that mandates what we can and can't do with regards to parking charges.
I can't remember. When the CAS was brought in, was this introduced with that as well?
So the emissions-based charges for permits came in around a similar time to Clean Air Zone, so they're complementary schemes. Their objectives are therefore similar, but they do focus on very different elements of air pollution. So the CAS was focused exclusively on nitrogen dioxide because of the ministerial directive. The emissions-based charges for both permits and these proposals for car parks focus on all pollutants that are coming out of the tailpipe of the vehicle.
So it's two different things, is that what you're saying?
They're complementary schemes.
Complementary, but it didn't get introduced with the CAS?
No, it didn't.
Brought in separately. Just wondered why.
Because they have slightly different objectives. They focus on different sets of road users. So our emissions-based permits was the first time we'd introduced that sort of variable charge. And this car park approach is sort of a natural evolution. I think in part the reason we didn't do car park charges at the same time was limitations of the technology. So we've got an opportunity as we're replacing our fleet of pound display machines to also apply the same process to cash paying customers as well. The alternative at the time would have been for cash customers to have either not been subject to the charge, which would have been disproportionate and unfair for all users, or to have charged them the highest rate. Again, and that would have penalised those paying by cash.
Ian, that's good.
Thanks, Chair. It's fair and equitable to introduce admissions-based parking for the car parks as well as the street parking that we already have. But I live in an RPZ, and I pay more than the minimum because I do have a more polluting vehicle, which I seldom use, I hasten to add. But I don't know what my emissions are, and I'm sure many people don't know what their emissions are. How can we given that Bath is probably going to be one of the first authorities to introduce emissions-based parking where we have a minimum and a maximum fee, how are we going to overcome people's confusion and frustrations maybe when they turn up at a machine into their permit, they've only got cash, they think maybe they've only got £3.50 on them rather than £4.70. Whilst we have the signs in the car parks, are we going to be able to have signage outside the city? And how are we going to make people who are travelling into the area from further afield, how are they going to be aware of the minimum maximum that they will be paying?
Thank you. No, that's a really good question. So we have data of customers that regularly come and use our car parks. So we're engaging with those proactively, looking back over an extended period so that we can invite them to provide their feedback. So not only will they be aware of the charges, they'll have an opportunity to give their views as well. We're engaging with organisations around the Visit Bath, the Bath bit, to help them to spread that message. It is really complex, and the last thing we want to see is customers frustrated when they come into the car park. So the inclusion of the signs and seeking the wider public views, it is helpful to explain those messages. Our website, the information we provide to how visitors plan their messaging, will be designed to provide that information and give that clarity as well. It's also important that residents don't actually need, visitors and residents, all users of the car park, don't need to know their emissions data from their vehicle. Of course, if they know that, that's fantastic. It can help them have a wider awareness. But the exact charge will be calculated when they put their vehicle registration mark into either the machine or to My Permit. So a visitor planning to come to Bath from, for example, York, can already find out their parking charges in advance, helping to steer them to those sustainable options, because really we want them at the park and ride.
In amongst Ian's question, there was a question about, he said, were we the first to introduce such a charge? Are we?
As far as we're aware, we're the first to do it with our machine payments, so cash and card. Local authorities in London, Westminster, Bexley as well. Bexley's sign is, if I'm honest, horrific. It's quite overly complex. Have these charges, but they're only using them through their cashless provider.
Saskia.
Thank you, Chair. I very much welcome these emission-based charging. I had a question about visitors, well, car drivers with foreign registration plates. I didn't really notice this in the documents, but I now understand that they'll pay the highest charge. I don't have an issue with this, but I think communications around this is very important. So, yeah, again, going back to working with Visit Bath, working with BathBit, working with making sure that this is very clear on the website, because you can imagine a visitor from mainland Europe coming in with an electric car and being really surprised by how much they have to pay. So I guess, yeah, communications around that would be very important, and I think this has been picked up already by the media, so some PR work on this would be very important as well. Maybe increasing the communications about park and ride sites.
Thank you.
Jess, and then Alex.
Yeah, thank you for the paper. I thought it was really detailed and helpful. And it was really good to see the comments about retaining cash as a means to pay at machines, because I know that's really important to a lot of people in the community. So I was interested in the kind of socio-economic impact of the scheme, and it was good to see the proposed kind of waiver for the uplift in charge for people who pay a season ticket for the first 12 months. I think that that seems like a fair way for people to have some time to adjust to this. But just looking at the impact assessment and the section, where it considers socio-economically disadvantaged. Firstly, it's really good that is considered, because that's not a protected characteristic, and so we've looked into this, which is great. But I suppose I have some concerns about the cumulative impact of households across Baines, where with the emissions-based car parking charges applying to residence permit zones and to car parks, how these things add up. And it would be interesting to know, or important to know, I think, more about the impact on certain kinds of households. Like it notes in the annex that it may be that lower income households have an older car that emit more carbon dioxide, and so therefore they will be increasingly paying these charges. So I think it's important for the council to look at that, so that we can think about what we can do to better support these people, whether there is any scope for targeted schemes to help them to upgrade their vehicles, or whether there's any other way that we can kind of soften the impact of these well-intended schemes. So my question is the council looking at the cumulative impact of emissions-based parking charges? If not, is there a role for the committee to do that? Could we consider that for our work plan?
Thank you. That's a very good question, a very good point raised there. So we do recognise that there are increased charges. I think underlying, and this is a key point of the proposals that we put forward, is that poor air quality has a detrimental effect on everybody, particularly the vulnerable, and that will have a higher part to pay on those that can less change their vehicle as well. So it's a modest increase of 11 people per hour on average, but yes, disproportionately those less able to change their vehicles will be affected. So we'll take away the point around analysing this with the impact of other schemes and look to explore that further. We do have additional questions that we're proposing within the consultation so that we can help to identify respondents' views based on age group, based on their views around air quality more generally, and its importance as well to cross-reference the data sets.
Thank you, that's helpful. Can I ask one follow-up? Yeah. As part of the development of the scheme, did you look at how the implementation of it could be softened for Baines residents? So any ideas about how these new charges could be? We obviously used to have a discount for Baines residents in our car parks. We removed that, but has that been part of the thinking?
It hasn't for this scheme, no. The emphasis being because we've removed the emissions-based discount, the residence discounts in November last year, the focus here is around targeting the more polluting vehicles, and obviously if we start to provide those incentives to residents who have perhaps better access to active travel and those sustainable, more localised alternatives, it starts to undermine some of the benefits we're looking to achieve.
Any further questions? Saskia and then John.
In terms of offering financial support, so this was part of the Clean Air Zone, and I'm wondering if we could look into offering financial support to purchase a cycle or an electric cycle, because that would then, especially for the most deprivated, so that would then allow them to not have to pay those parking charges if there's an alternative.
Thank you. We're working closely with colleagues across the Place Directorate that are looking at active travel, and that includes proposals to convert and transform park and ride sites to mobility hubs, helping to further incentivise that shift. So there are lots of options being considered at this stage. There's no funding identified within these proposals to progress that, but I know that colleagues are looking at work streams.
John, yeah.
I'm a little concerned about the impact on foreign visitors. Obviously, we do rely on visitors coming to Bath, and if somebody's driving their own vehicle when they come to visit, they're not on the DVLA vehicle emissions database, what's the ratio between the maximum charge that they would pay as opposed to the minimum charge that somebody in an electric vehicle would pay? And could there be a way perhaps for the foreign visitor to say, I'm driving an electric vehicle in order to get the benefit of the fact that they're not polluting, and therefore get the benefit by having a lower charge to pay?
I think the limitations we have there are access to the data in order to confirm that, because the risk with allowing the user to provide confirmation, we're not aware of any data they could provide at this stage, but it opens up opportunities for individuals to play the system. So we know that lots of motorists like to not register their vehicles with DVLA because it allows them to evade various road traffic offences. Now I know that that's not the case with foreign vehicles, of course, but the data is not available to us. But I think it goes back to the point made by Councillor Halsall about encouraging the alternatives, because whilst their electric vehicle isn't emitting any particulates from its tailpipe, because it doesn't have one, it's still adding to road congestion. It's still brake wear, tyre wear. It's still adding to other levels of pollutants on the highway. So the focus being to push those vehicles, those visitors, to the park and rides, and actually keeping those vehicles outside the city centre.
Yeah, we might not have online access to the data, but surely the enforcement officer who's going around will be able to, in the parking area, will be able to say, well, wait a minute, this person's self-declared that they have an electric vehicle, and this is not an electric vehicle, and therefore you issue a penalty of some sort. So the enforcement officer could do that to some extent, even if we don't have real-time access online.
No, I agree. That is a really good point. I think we'll take that away and consider it. I think one first thing to note on that, I suppose, is that the machines don't, because it's an automated, seamless process, there's no opportunity there to provide that lower value charge to an individual in those circumstances. If we were to provide such a solution, it would be available for everyone to abuse. I take the point around enforcement, could do that validation. That will reduce the ability of officers to be on the street in residential areas and would require additional focus in car parks. So there would be some disbenefits to that.
Alex, and then Ian.
Well, once we see how it goes in Bath, I represent an area which has a lot of council car parks in North East Somerset, and I was wondering, will there be an opportunity in the future, if we think it's going well in Bath, that it might spread out? Or is that something that we're taking it one step at a time and starting in the city and working our way?
Thank you. So we're replacing the equipment in Keynsham as well. So technically, there's certainly no reason why there couldn't be a wider deployment of emissions-based roadway charging if there's a desire to do so.
I think there will be a lot of residents of the whole district who are pleased that Baines isn't going exclusively to contactless payments or card payments. My question relates to extra costs. Obviously, the council is liable to pay a charge for any card transactions. Is that correct? Am I right in thinking that?
That's correct.
So obviously the council is liable for that. But I'm sure that's offset by the increase in charges by having the emissions-based parking. Am I right in thinking that in terms of cash, there's obviously going to be an extra expense in terms of cash handling fees, security for staff? That's been taken into consideration, I'm guessing, as well.
Yes, so we currently have a cash option at the moment, and throughout the pandemic, we've seen a significant reduction in, as we've noted, only £1 million, but that's 28% of all transactions. Our expenditure for cash collection services across all of our machines pre-pandemic was about £150,000 a year. That's now fallen to about £40,000 a year, and there's probably little scope to take that further before those costs that you talk around staff, vehicles, security start to make the service unviable. So we have reduced income from cash. We recognise that it is a good payment option for lots of groups, which is why it's important to retain it at this time. So it certainly won't add any additional costs to the current budget.
So just got an extra question. It relates to the My Permit. The council has no liability to pay the charge, but the actual person using the app has to pay that. There's a question about fairness there. Is there not a way that the council can maybe absorb that commission that the app user will have to spend when they tap in their registration number and book their parking permit?
It's certainly something that's possible. It has been explored on a number of occasions. Of course, there is a financial impact in balancing the budget from that, but it remains an option that we can take away and explore. Yeah. Thank you.
You touched upon emissions in terms of EVs. So in the report, it seems to me that I've read EVs do not emit, so I would like to just confirm that if we can avoid talking about EVs as not emitting, it's just non-exhaust emissions, different type of emissions. And that, I'm not sure if we're ready to go to the draft designs of the sign, but the wording on there, some of the wording says least polluting vehicles and most polluting vehicles. I would like to clarify that it's about least CO2, or I think the other wording is, least polluting, most polluting. So maybe if we can just clarify that so that it's technically correct.
Yes, can do, thank you. If I can just clarify the point as well around the link between pollutants and CO2, because of course we've said it's not about the climate emergency. The use of CO2 is there as a measure because it's an established mechanism and framework within the road fund licence, the car tax. So the bans are well published. We're limited to the data we have that's held by the DVLA, and the rationale behind linking it to those bans is CO2 output is of course a byproduct of internal combustion. So the more CO2 you're emitting, the rationale being therefore the more internal combustion that's taking place, therefore the higher volume of pollutants more generally, and that's how we make the link.
Thank you. My question was just to clarify, is this scheme going to be revenue raising overall, and if so, is that revenue ring-fenced in any way for sustainable transport?
Any increased parking charges, or as an established mechanism to drive that behaviour change, its byproduct will be to raise some revenue. Some customers will use those alternatives, and that will see a fall in revenue to be offset by those that pay increased charges. So yes, there is an understanding that increased revenue will come in through these. Where those charges are, where that income is allocated, I would have to refer to finance colleagues for that, I'm afraid. It's within part of the balanced budget that the council has.
Thank you. That might be something useful to have feedback on as part of the minutes.
Yes. Okay. As car parking charges, it is available for use by the general fund.
Okay. Ian?
Obviously, with any increase in charge, especially related to parking or parking permits, there is always a degree of cynicism amongst members of the public, but it's just a cash cow for the council. We're just trying to make more money, obviously, when we're not. Like following on from Jess's question, your comment about, we will lose revenue if we get people to use alternatives, we will increase revenue, but that can be reinvested into sustainable transport. I'm just wondering, as well as having in the car parks a formal official sign, advising the customer about the charging mechanism and the fines, obviously, and penalties. Is there a way we could maybe consider having an informal sign in the short to medium term next to the official sign, just to explain why we are increasing the charges and basing on emissions? Obviously, just to quell the cynicism about we're just trying to make money, to actually emphasise that we are seriously looking at the climate and emergency, and that's the reason we're doing this. So not having it in a sort of very formal blue and black, having it in a more sort of informal presentation.
Well, we could certainly look at that. We have, we're not constrained by the regulations that we have for our highways within our car parks, so as long as our signage is clear, then we have freedom to put in what we feel is appropriate. We're already exploring opportunities to promote things like the park and ride service as a means for customers that don't want to pay those charges. Where can they go next? So not just getting them before the car park, but catching them once they've arrived. So yes, we can certainly take that point away and explore that as well. We do have to be mindful that for consistency with both on-street and off-street proposals, we have to place the emphasis around those improvements in pedestrian safety. But of course, there is that clear benefit from the climate emergency that comes from that as well.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to Saskia's question and your answer to it. Saskia's question was about the difference between pollution and emissions, and your answer was, well, the two are related. And I think a key point is that not all of the pollution comes out of the tailpipe. So yes, they're related in terms of particulates and carbon dioxide emissions when the particulates are coming out of the tailpipe, but they also come out from the wear on the tyres and so forth. There are other sources of pollution. So I think there's still value in differentiating between what sorts of pollution versus emissions we might be referring to.
No, very good point, and thank you.
In terms of park and ride sides, it would be amazing to point everyone to those, especially people visiting from abroad. But there's obviously limited hours in terms of the bus connection to town. So I think it would be really good if we could increase those hours also for people who are key workers in town who need to park. They sometimes cannot use the park and ride because of the bus services available at certain times. So yeah, the increasing of those hours would be very good for the bus service.
Thank you. We'll pass that feedback. We'll sure that feedback goes across to colleagues that work closely with WECA on managing that service. I think one thing I can add, because it is broadly outside of my service areas, any increased usage of the park and ride service obviously increases the income that the council retains, which helps to underpin the viability of the service more generally, and that, of course, can fund or be used to fund extensions of hours if that's appropriate. Thank you.
I've got a question.
although I do love the idea of Bath paying a lot more money than the rest of North East Somerset, there is a certain element of unfairness in the system, and I was wondering, it's really about cost of machines, is my question essentially, because I would quite like the idea of parking machines being in, say, Midsummer Norton and Radstock and places like that, where if you have a non-polluting car or a less polluting car, you don't pay. Whereas if you have a more polluting car, you do. Now, my question, obviously, it's a financial question in a sense, because at some point, and I mean, there have been movements in the past which have been rejected to have parking charges in other parts of North East Somerset, apart from Keynsham. I just wondered if that was financially viable to have an idea of having them there and it's free if you've got a non-polluting or less polluting car.
Thank you. I think it's certainly a viable option. We already have pay and display equipment in Radstock. We don't have any Midsummer Norton because there's no limitations on the duration of stay. But Radstock is time limited. We manage that through a pay and display equipment with a free VEN ticket. So we'll be replacing those so that we have the same back office system throughout our area. So certainly, as a next step, parking charges remain an option where equipment exists. Yes.
Are there any other questions? I'm sure this is not going to happen very often, but we are still ahead of time. So congratulations on your brevity and yours, and thank you very much for an excellent presentation and very well answered questions. So well done. Okay, thank you very much. You're free to go. We now move on to the last item on the agenda, which is the panel future work plan. We have, I think, identified 2 to add to our work plan. I'll defer to Kerry, who can explain what they were, because I've sort of forgotten.
Thanks, Chair. We agreed to bring an update on the journey to net zero to the next meeting. We also we haven't firmed up in terms of timelines, but in terms of the engagement plan that's been developed to complement the climate strategy, that we'll add that to our forward plan, and I'll work with the officers to agree when's best to bring that to panel. We've also got an item that we'd like to receive an item on local food growing at a time that works with colleagues as well.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. And all it remains to me is to say thank you for your attendance, and I hope you have Jess?
Can we ask about items for the future work plan as part of this item?
Yes, if you wish, yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to ask if we could do something around the health of our rivers, which would give the committee the opportunity to hear from different organisations like the Bristol Avon River Trust, Wessex Water. Obviously, water quality, but also safety for things like swimming is a big concern to our residents. Can we as a committee look at that and possibly help to inform our development of new local planning policies, that kind of thing, or at least hear from some of these organisations about the work that's happening and make some recommendations for how the council could support them?
Yeah, really good idea. Sorry, you did mention it earlier and I forgot, so I apologise to you for that. Yeah, absolutely. If it's possible, I think our rivers, we have a substantial river in this area and 1 or 2 quite significant rivers in this area. So I think river pollution is quite a hot topic at the moment. So I think this is something we should be looking at. Yeah, so I'm happy to add it to the future work plan. Thank you, Jess. Other suggestions? Okay, well we've seen quite a lot already. So that's. Oh, sorry, Holly.
I don't know if it's appropriate for me to make an additional point, but we were just discussing, given Councillor Morland's suggestion around Councillor David's suggestion around meeting other groups. One of the thoughts that we'd had before that we didn't put on the table was to actually organise site visits, if that would be of interest to the committee. If there are particular areas, particularly around some of the nature sites that there are around the district.
I do like a Sharabang ride. Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else from anybody? I thought you were putting out there from you. No. Okay, well, thank you very much for attending. Thank you for your questions and your concentration through the meeting. It's always good when a meeting finishes early because I think I've still got a bit of concentration left, which is always a pleasure. The date of the next meeting is September the 24th? 14th, is it? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'll send all that out.
Yeah, September the 14th, we think. Okay, have a good rest of the day.